Hello there and welcome. Today we're talking about indie web, a people-focused alternative to the corporate web. We're asking ourselves, what is it? And assuming it's a good thing, how can we get involved? We'd appreciate any input by those who know more than we do, either as a future guest on this show or with comments on our YouTube post. Speaking of which, apologies to anybody who is audio only listening. They might be expecting something more on building 11T static sites. But yeah, we did 2 episodes on that, but they were only suitable for the YouTube channel. So we're going to be talking about the indie web today. And as always, it's David Wormsley. How are you doing, David?
Yeah, I mean, really good. I'm pleased to be doing this one because for the last couple, it's kind of been on me to try and bluff my way through how to use this kind of new platform. And now this is something where, well, kind of you introduced me to most things with the indie web, and I'm still trying to grapple with what that is and how I can employ that in my work, particularly with client work. But
Yeah.
so it's nice. I can just kind of hand much of this over to you, but we have got some show notes which I've prepared.
Yeah, I'll show the show notes in a minute, but I want to be very careful to caveat emptor,
Okay.
make the case that I don't really practice what I preach here. I kind of follow the indie web stuff from a distance, and where I can, I participate, not in terms of time, but in terms of the things that are out there. I try to use some of those things, but I am no means an expert in this. But it's a fascinating thing, and it'd be interesting to see how it grows or otherwise in the future, and what the incentives are, and how it might be more aligned with, I don't know, a people first approach to the internet, that kind of thing. Shall I share our show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's just that most of the things that come up here are things that you've kind of been onto ahead of me or pointed me to. So it's quite interesting. This. Yeah. So
And I get my information from a really broad range of sources. So some of them, really not very well aligned to the indie web. So proprietary social media platforms where these kind of bits of information come at me, but also from listening to an eclectic range of podcasts around the internet space. So obviously I primarily do WordPress-based content, but listening to podcasts more about the internet as a whole and what's going on out there. There's loads of information. And I think this is a really interesting topic, kind of a topic of our time, really, if you're involved in the internet, but you have a slight suspicion that the corporations have taken over and made it into a place which isn't incentivized for humans, but for algorithms and profit.
yeah, exactly. So I guess discovering what it is, we'd have to go first to indieweb.org. And for those who are viewing, I'm just going to go over to their site over here. And I mean, that's the title really of our show, is that it's a people-focused alternative to the corporate web. There's a lot more here. I mean, it is still a very active thing. As we can see down here, there are still kind of meetups and camps that go on with that. I can see this one here. I can see Jen Simmons here attending one of these. To me, it feels like when I mean, I really haven't gone through this site, but when I was looking through how to kind of get started with it, a lot of the resources to get you going were kind of ironically, I guess, in the same way we're doing this on YouTube, but there were YouTube videos, from sort of 10 years ago. But I guess the point behind this hasn't changed. It's just hard to judge how active this kind of thing is.
Yeah, and also geographically, it's kind of interesting as well, because I don't know if you can just scroll down once more and just pause there. If you just hover there for a minute, you'll see that quite a lot of it is seems to be based at the minute, at least anyway, in Europe and, but I don't know if that's the case. It may be that this is more broadly spread out. But also it does seem to be underpinned by some kind of principle. Again, if you scroll to the top of the page, there's a link right to the very, very top. There's a link to where it says we are a community of independent and personal websites based on principles, and that obviously is a link. And the principles are owning your domain and using it as your primary online identity, something I think most people in the WordPress space would align with. Publishing on your own site first, optionally elsewhere, and owning your own content. So it's this idea of just you are the gatekeeper of it all, and you don't first lean into some third-party service like Facebook or Twitter. You do all of the publishing on your own content, which then you have control over. And if you choose to do anything, you would then sort of cross post or what have you from there. And obviously platforms like Mastodon and ActivityPub, the protocol behind it, are enabling it so that your website can become a first citizen on the internet as well. So yeah, there we go. That's roughly
And also,
it.
something I didn't pick up on before until I went to Wikipedia, it actually lists out their 10 core principles, which I don't think we'll go through them all because I don't know if I understand them all. But it was interesting. Just before we press record, you were saying, oh, you know one of the guys who lives quite local to you.
Well, yeah, not really know so much, but I've had a few interactions with him on social media. It's a guy called Kevin Marks, and he appeared. The only reason I know Kevin is I don't know him. I've never met him. I've only had literally like 2 or 3 exchanges on Twitter. But he used to appear regularly on a podcast. It's a video podcast that I watch and listen to called. Well, it used to be called This Week in Google, and now it's changed to Intelligent Machines. But the point is, it's the same thing. And so I heard of him, and he regularly came on that show and outlined a lot of the different bits and pieces that were going on in the indie web. So I think that was my first point of contact. But there's Tantek Selek, Amber Case, Aaron, I don't know how you pronounce that, Pechke or Perchke or something like that. Crystal Beasley and Kevin there, they seem to be the main proponents. But it seems to be a very human-centered approach, which aligns with what I think. So it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think apart from some of the things that you mentioned, which really didn't click in as being part of the indie web, my first real introduction was, and I mean, I really didn't know about Hayden Pickering, but he did this video, it's going back to 2021, called Why the Indie Web.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, his videos are all hilarious, and he makes so many points in a very short video. They're usually only about 7, nearly 8 minutes long on this one, and there's a transcript. Definitely worth watching. It's hilarious. It really goes through the whole history of the web and how we are where we are now, and it kind of highlights this with, the need to take the web, which was something free that we all became accustomed to make this into something profitable, so you can sell barbecue sets in his case there, video. But yeah, and he also has some main points about the indie web, about taking control of that.
But it's kind of, I think we need to be forgiving of ourselves. Like, that video is really well done, by the way. It's a perfect encapsulation of the whole thing. But it's, I don't think anybody knew what was going to happen on the internet. I don't think there was like this cabal of people kind of rubbing their hands together, sort of, it's going to go perfectly in this direction. It just ended up the way it ended up because it just did. Platforms like Facebook and what have you came along and offered us something which apparently we wanted. And then once it was established that we wanted it, the profit margin and the incalculable, easy for me to say, incalculable wealth that could be made from a platform which had no boundaries of geography, seemingly no ceiling on the number of users that were prepared to spend hours of their day involved in that platform. And is it any wonder that it became a corporate thing and billions of dollars were generated? And that whole profit motive then seems to have a life of its own, and it gets worse and it gets worse, and we are where we are.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot talks on it, and I think possibly in that video of Hayden's, he says, and now to introduce the villain, capitalism. And in some ways we didn't really see it. We see it now retrospectively as that, because we realize that when you put something like the internet and what it's become over time, that obviously it's going to get distorted by the current mode of capitalism. People need to earn money from it, so it's distorted. This kind of essentially free web that we were given, to use for our own communication, it's kind of got lost. In these big giants who own the algorithms, and obviously, change the way that all of us behave and the types of communication we have each other with each other.
And I think we've slowly but surely kind of given over our perception of what's normal on the internet. So, if you rewind right to the beginning when it was CERN and the, really going right back, ARPANET and things like that, where people were just academically curiously, oh, hyperlinks, Tim Berners-Lee. Oh, look at that. I can put a link behind this word and that will open up a page somewhere else on this diaspora of servers. And that was just fabulously philanthropic, it felt like. There was no profit motive. And then people discovered, oh, you can set cookies. Oh, that's interesting. Cookies, I think, probably were initially just for state, maintaining, like, are you logged in? Are you not logged in? And then clever people thought, oh, we can do a little bit more with that. We can track you across things, and suddenly there's a profit motive for capturing your attention and keeping you on there longer, and we are where we are. But luckily, the underpinnings haven't changed. The technologies, the stack behind the internet is the same. So we don't have to keep going in the direction that the corporations are pulling us. We can just sort of rein it back and go back to it just being a bunch of links without cookies and without tracking and without, the billions of dollars generated.
Yeah, I mean, we found the need to do that. And, big corporations like Google, Microsoft, Adobe, all of them are involved in the building and working together on browsers, the building of CSS. And in some ways, the web is stronger than it's ever been, because we all realize that it is what it was intended to be, something for everybody on everything, this one standard that we all use. So I think in some ways that's back in force. So I think, in some ways, the next question I put on the notes here, which we might as well move into, is like, this was my sense of it when going to the indie web. So I hear about it. For me, it was Hayden's video. I go and look up the site of what's this indie web people are talking of. And then I don't really get a sense of whether it's growing. And it's still very difficult to know that as a sort of movement. But you said this, and I wrote it as exactly the same notes when we were talking earlier, that I don't think it can be measured as a sort of movement of the numbers of people or the meetings that they have there. It shows itself through different reactions.
Yeah, and my expectation is that it might be growing, but I would imagine it's growing at a fairly slow rate. And what I mean by that is, you don't really hear the mainstream talking about any of this stuff. It does seem to be a small collection of people who are interested in this. And honestly, if you ask me to give you any commentary about almost any subject that humans talk about, I've got no interest in 99.9% of those subjects. There's a handful of things that I'm interested in, and I love those, and I talk about them. Well, the same's true about this, isn't it? Most people, you switch on your phone or you switch on the computer, the only thing they care about is, does it work? And not what's the moral basis for it, or what is the underlying protocol, and where's the data going. It's like, if I click this, can I buy it? Yeah, okay, that works. Who cares? I don't, because there's no violence associated with this. There's no impediment to it working. The fact that your data is being consumed here, there, and everywhere, I honestly think most people do not care, so long as it works. And they're very happy with the trade-off of, you show me a ton of ads and I'll try to be inoculated against them. I'll try to ignore them. But if it's free, you show me ads, that's fine. I think most people have that impression, but you and I are slightly different, I think.
Yeah, I think you're ahead of me on that one, because I didn't care too much about that kind of stuff. And there is a kind of irony. I mean, it's slightly off the point here, but we don't have the same kind of high streets that you would have certainly in the UK that there was in the old days. And you kind of think, you don't know at the time, do you? You work at a shop, you're busy, you want to buy other stuff from other shops, but you're busy working and stuff, so you buy from Amazon. Amazon then slowly starts to put that shop out of business. Eventually, you're all out of business, and you're only all buying from Amazon.
But
And
it's also,
you don't know you're destroying your own industry yourself.
Yeah, but we're also in a curious time. Like, if you think about it, mass communication, I guess really you could begin that with something like the telephone. But the telephone was very much a one-to-one, and it didn't have it wasn't kind of recording anything. It really is only in the last 15 or so years that
Yes.
people have been able to have some sort of global conversation, like normal people. Obviously, if you're the Prime Minister of the UK or the President of the US, you've been able to have those conversations, but most of us don't. And now we're thrust into this scenario where you can message people anywhere in the world, and I'm not sure as a species we're quite quite ready for it, frankly. You know, in rewind the clock, I don't know, 100 years, 200 years, something like that, which in the history of our species is not that long. You probably didn't really get much further than your front door on a typical year. You know, you might wander a few hundred yards here, there, and everywhere. There's no trains, there's no cars. Would have been an effort to own a horse and get anywhere on that. It would have still taken days. But the point is, your world was much smaller, and
Yes.
we have this impression that because it's now bigger and we're involved in global things, and I can, I mean, you're in Goa, I'm in Yorkshire, North Yorkshire. And yet here we are talking as if we're next door to, I mean, literally, you could be sat next to me. You know, I can hear every word you're saying and every breath and everything. It's,
Yeah.
is that normal? I don't know if that's, I don't know if that's a good idea in the end.
But for us, it feels like, I mean, I feel like I'm in the UK anyway when I'm talking to you, because culturally I'm still
Yeah.
very much in the UK, and that's so full of that kind of news. But anyways,
Yeah.
so
Sorry.
what's it come that I was trying to get a few of the things where I think maybe the movement is shifting, and I put some things down here, which I think is quite interesting, is these kind of shifts that we've seen to, say, Blue Sky using the AT protocol, and Mastodon, which, again, you were really early on in using Mastodon, where I thought, what is this? Which is using ActivityPub, which is a
Yeah.
standard, isn't it? It's a W3C standard.
Yeah. So this is the idea of kind of replacing platforms with protocols. So instead of using Twitter or X, you use ActivityPub. So, you know, anybody can use the ActivityPub protocol and build their own thing on top of it. So Mastodon isn't what's powering the technology, it's the ActivityPub protocol. And so, you know, you've seen moves in the WordPress space. We have the ActivityPub protocol, plugin. You have things like Pixel Fed and various things built on top. And so the idea is there's this interoperable layer, and it's standards based. Anybody can work with it. You know, you can own your own instance of Mastodon, but the protocol is the thing that you're interested in, not the platform. And the AT, or I think it's AT protocol, which is the one that Blue Sky is using, is similar but different. One of the things that it hasn't yet done, as of recording this, it hasn't gone all in the same way that ActivityPub has. For example, I don't think you can move your account yet from one platform to another. So you don't kind of own your data in that way, but the intention is that it will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. I think they're trying to get their ducks in a row. But these two are moves to open up social interactions, and well, any interaction really, any kind of activity on the internet, and it to be built upon an open platform which anybody can use. And so you can go to Mastodon and you won't be bombarded with ads. There's no algorithm there trying to game your feed. You basically get a chronological feed of content produced by people in the order in which they produced it. So if you follow no people, your timeline is empty. If you follow 12 people, it will be fairly quiet. If you follow 1,000 people, it'll be noisy. But there won't be an algorithm trying to insert an ad or trying to say, this post will capture your attention. Let's put that in front of you because you'll stay on for a bit longer. None of that. The thing is, you could build that on top of ActivityPub. You could build that platform, but I expect not too many people would want to use it. But anyway.
Yeah, and I suspect all the big moves to Mastodon and Blue Sky particularly, I think, coming so quickly is due to the way that Twitter had gone, and the direction with that. And I think, you know, it's perhaps the same. I mean, we'll look to those big players, but rather than being something that the indie web people think, no, I shouldn't have these algorithms affecting me. It really comes down to a sort of breaking point, the politics or the
for me, the break that I needed was just realizing that my attention, I was not able to compete against the algorithm. I literally was unable to stop using the phone.
Yeah.
I've decided to call the phone from now on the rectangle. That's what I'm going to refer to it as. So I refer to people staring at the rectangle, because it gives it that sort of like, what the heck? kind of, I don't know, like very third party kind of, it's bleak and it's a bit like something at the obelisk out of 2001, A Space Odyssey or something like that. But I was unable to stop doing it, and I would be doing it at all times of the day, which I knew 4 a.m. Why the heck am I doing this? And I realized that it was because these algorithms had completely captured me, and it was not in my interest to be staring at the rectangle at 4 a.m.
And I think something which I certainly became aware of, I lost my Facebook access. So it was hacked in some way. Somebody managed to do something. There was a security issue there, and there was no way I could really convince them to put me back. And I had a group which was growing there. So they, suddenly I couldn't communicate to this group that I've gone, the person running this group. And that was the thing that really attracted me to things like Facebook, was only the groups and a special collection of people. But I realized, as I think more people do, as we see them come and go, that we know these platforms will eventually die and others will take over. And if it's important for you to own your content, then you probably need to be looking. If it's disposable, then that's fine, isn't it? But if you feel there's some value in keeping it and having ownership over it, you do need to find alternatives.
That's right. It's a really peculiar trade-off, though, isn't it? Because the platforms like Facebook, for example, have captured all the audience. My intuition is that Facebook might be in decline, but that is purely intuition. It's not based upon any data. But if you have your congregation, for want of a better word, over on Facebook, and like you, something happens and you lose access, well, that's gone. I mean, it's completely gone. But growing an audience outside of Facebook, I think, is really hard, because, or YouTube or TikTok or whatever it may be, because they do such a great job of, if you're producing content which their algorithm says, look, this is making waves, therefore it's making our platform money, they will then push the audience for you. They will make the audience for you. And so it's a real trade-off. Trying to do it yourself is much harder, but obviously you own it. And if TikTok decides to shut you down, it doesn't matter,
Yeah. There's a point actually later on that, and we'll get to that. If there's so many other points that we put on, whether it's growing or that. I mean, I put in maybe these state interventions, the things that we're seeing with the EU, with data protection, accessibility, and certainly with the US having monopoly concerns over the likes of what Apple and Google do as well. Is that part of in some ways it's legislating against monopolies, which is what I guess everybody's worried about.
Yeah, I don't really know, actually. I mean, obviously, the things like the GDPR and the concern about where your data is held. So, if you're typing on a keyboard in Germany, but the result of that typing in gets saved to some server in the US, I think that seems to be a topic of growing concern. It's so ephemeral, though, for most people to, like, how do you capture that in the minds of most people? How do you get people to care about that? Because all that you care about is that the next time you go in, the pixels come back onto your screen. And, so, okay, when I wrote to John 6 months ago, let me just go back to that conversation with John. There it is. There's the conversation I had with John. I remember what we said now. It's like, where was that data? I don't care. I mean, I care, but I don't think most people care. But that does seem to be a part, and we're in a fairly fractured time in terms of international diplomacy and politics and things. So it'd be interesting to see how these lines get drawn, and whether we will be siloing our data inside of our own national boundaries more and more. But I don't know if it's a part of it. It kind of feels like it is a part of it. Anybody that's watching this can tell us.
And I think definitely what seems a part of it to me was, at the same time, there was a lot of, I guess, conference chats that I saw with a renewed interest and an encouragement by many to get creative again, as we did in the early web, with HTML and CSS, and make your own personal sites, have your own ownership there. And again, it's something that you put me on to first. I mean, there was a newsletter, Own Your Web. I'm just
that's
on the
right,
screen. Yeah, by Matthias Ott there. And
I like this.
it's great. I mean, it just just encourages people that they can just build these websites together, as we did in the early days. And people have forgotten about it now. It's been taken over by everybody. Kind of feels the easiest way is a web builder or something. So yeah, it's a really good series, and it led me on to realizing there are other services I wasn't aware of. Things like Glitch here, which is kind of a little bit like GitHub Pages or Netlify, which we use, but it's really a bit more aimed at free hosting for people who want to kind of do their own basic sites, get started with HTML, maybe start with some templates. Levity, which we've been talking around, is, you know, on the remix here for easy blogging with the Levity is in here. So again, it's something that's been around for a while, but not hugely taken off though.
It's kind of interesting how we've entered this era. And you keep calling it the subscription economy, where you just sort of pay a little bit and you have access to all this stuff, but you don't own any of it. So in the case of music, you know, you might pay Spotify $10 a month or something, and once that elapses, the music's all gone. Whereas when you were a child and I was a child, you purchased the music and it was yours forever. And sure enough, you didn't have access to all the music, and you thought long and hard about which CDs you were going to buy. But thinking about it, in my childhood, growing up, we rented nothing. I mean, that we had a mortgage on the house that we lived in, but everything, all transactions were a case of you pay for the thing and you get the thing, and it's now yours to own. Whereas now there's a shift to, okay, I'll pay you a small amount on a monthly basis or an annual basis or what have you. And the trade-off is that you won't ever own it, but it'll be yours during the period in which you are paying me. Of course, the problem is when you no longer can pay it, like you either choose not to pay it, or you run out of money, or you retire and suddenly realize that all these bills that you've been able to service for all this time are no longer possible, and suddenly all your access to the music is gone, and you probably would have been better off building up a record collection all those years. You know, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I linked to on there, which I think is great because it won't come up in search very easily, but it's HTML for People, which again is fairly new, and it's somebody just putting a starter for people who just want to get back to those early days when you just want to build something that you own yourself. So I feel there is a big encouragement, if you like. It almost feels a little bit like the 70s, just when punk came in, this idea that people could just get back and make music with 3 chords themselves with a bit of attitude rather than having to know all this sophisticated stuff. And it feels a little bit like it's kind of encouraging that for people to be a little bit more as they were. The websites, most of the designs we do them to a formula. We've read something like Story Brand, and we know we need to write a certain type of headline and have this in a certain order. You know, our 3 benefits need to be listed after our value proposition. And in the early days, when people had GeoCities and even MySpace to a certain degree, they were kind of a bit wacky with their designs. So there's that going on, the idea of, you know, showing your creativity through your own personal site and owning the data and sharing with the world just any interests and thoughts that you have. And I think that's lost. The idea that people, you know, will go and set up Facebook because it's easier to communicate with their friends, but there are less people now who, without any commercial reason, will set it up just as a way of self-expression.
Yeah, it really is. Honestly, the internet is such a power for good, isn't it? You know, it's such it's an amazing resource that humanity has. And it does seem a shame. I guess, honestly, you know, looking back, I suppose to some extent it was inevitable that money was going to get involved and kind of take over the whole thing. But it will be interesting to see if a proportion of the people can wrestle that. Maybe this isn't a situation where we're trying to make it either or. It's more a situation of, okay, those that want to roll their own and do the indie web thing, they can do that, and the corporate stuff that can carry on as well, and we can have a bit of both. Maybe that's the sort of ideal seesaw of it all.
And I think it's in there. I think it's with the indie web, an alternative, and I think everybody needs an alternative. And that's it, isn't it? I think, you know, we always need. I think commercialism must push forward the web to being what we couldn't imagine it being initially to what it is now. So it's kind of needed there, but there is this point where it feels like if you're only on the web to serve a corporate, you know, it's kind of lost a lot. So Yeah. So what
Mm,
can we do? Let's have a. Have I covered the points here? Oh, I did want to mention here. I'll bring it up here. It's the Humane Web.
humane, sorry, yeah, apologies. Humane
Yes.
Web Manifesto. There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like this. So this comes from Michelle Barker has set this up. So she writes a lot on CSS and does some talks and that. She's
I love that
Monday.
website, by the way.
She did. It's funny. You really like some bold stuff. You see,
Love that.
yeah. Funny enough, I think you at heart you kind of like this personal expression stuff that you see with these
Yeah.
sites. So you always react to those. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's an overlap with lots of people doing these kind of various different things. So her point is, a point on the top there, it's becoming that the web is becoming hostile to humans, that people are being tracked and that their privacy is routinely violated, and that search is just kind of giving you ads and everything. So her kind of take on it is also from not just where the data goes, but also the eco-friendliness of stuff. And I think that's one of her big things, to make lighter websites that don't burn the planet is one of her big things on that, but kind of made for humans again. And similarly, there are other things. Let me just bring these up. People are taking badges and things like the People Pledge. I don't know if this is a good thing or not, whether it's just helping this particular domain to get a lot of attention, or whether it's this kind of nice idea that you put a badge on your site, which is saying that you stand for these things. You're not going to discriminate or devalue anyone on the basis of their age, gender, identity, and other things, like one which I'm tempted to put on any site that I do, which is
Not by AI. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So you can have little badges like that. So I don't know if that's connected with in a way, it seems the same sort of move. It's sort of like positioning against a corporate direction, if you like.
Yeah, it's hard to encapsulate, isn't it? Because this whole movement isn't summed up in one trite little sentence. There's just some feeling in the back of my head about what it is, and I can't encapsulate it perfectly. Like if you showed me a website and you asked me, does this align? I'm not sure. Does it? I'm not entirely sure, but there's a feeling, and it kind of feels a little bit philanthropic. It feels a little bit I don't know, left leaning, for want of a better word. It seems to be more all embracing. It's definitely not about making loads of money. I'm wondering secretly, if we got all of the people involved in the indie web on a deep and profound level and asked them, would you like to live in a commune? I wonder what the answer would be.
So we've got we're back to some hippie 60 times, not
Yeah, that's right.
hugging trees. Yeah,
it is a bit. Don't you feel it is a bit of that though? There is some of that sprinkled over the top of this, without a doubt. Yeah. Okay, what can we do? Oh, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. Well, I won't read out. It is fascinating, Hayden Pickering's conclusion, but it's a lot to read out there, what he says we should do. But I'll leave that on the site there. There was something which I was introduced to. Actually, it was by Zach Leatherman, the author of 11.2 we've been talking about. He did a talk, I think about 5 years ago or something, on this. And he introduced me to this concept of POSSE, which stands for Publish on Your Own Site, Syndicate Elsewhere.
I love that.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you can start to do, can't you, with these protocols, where you can start to say, okay, the canonical link, the URL is yours, and then your content goes out to all these other services to attract things. And yeah, he cites the example, actually, Jeremy Keith and his site. He's very good at being able to set these things up. So almost he talks about it as well a lot. He's a big, defender of the indie web, of course, as you might expect with him. I can't really show you any examples of it. But
no, it's very much tied up with like a band in a pub at the moment, isn't it?
Yes. But that's really how he's running his site. It always stays with him on his domain, and it gets sent everywhere else. I mean, I was
just going to say, there's a lot of moves in WordPress at the moment to make this possible. So the TPub protocol, which is built by a chap called Matthias Pfefferle, he's building it. He's been he now works for Automatic, but the idea is very much that it's that you publish on your own website, and then your website is the account on an ActivityPub related platform like Mastodon or PixelFed. So you publish it there, and it's not cross-posting. So it's not, when you hit publish, it's not then pushing it out to Mastodon. It is the Mastodon account. The website is the account. And that's kind of hard to get your head around because we're not used to that. And then in the future, it's built or being built. The idea is that if somebody comments on Mastodon or PixelFed from that, or any other platform on the ActivityPub protocol, those comments come back into your WordPress post or page. And then if you reply, that all gets sent out. And it's all happening. You've got that conversation on your own your own website. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I had a little look at that. I was interested in, because it wasn't the high numbers for the plugin that goes with that allows you to do that easy. And I'm also looking at it because we've decided to not go the WordPress route and do it with 11T for us.
Yep.
I want to see if we can do the very same thing as well with us, to have it as a kind of commenting system to make sure that
there's this whole thing called web mentions, but that's as far as I can take you with that. I don't really know how that would be implemented or what that really encapsulates, but I know that in this community, in the sort of indie web community, web mentions is that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there are methods as well. I saw one for being able to, I mean, it doesn't matter what platform you're using, as long as you've got the control where you can use the protocol from Blue Sky to use Blue Sky as your kind of commenting system.
Right. I guess that would have a very similar endeavor. And I know now there's a ton of work being done for people bridging those two protocols. So literal bridges, so that one connects perfectly with the other, so that the two protocols bind together, so that you could, I don't know, have something that links over to Mastodon and Blue Sky and can publish onto them both at the same time, that kind of thing.
Just notes here. I mean, it's very hard to, when we talk about a lot of these things, so there's usually a question, it's a bit like SEO, where there'll be articles saying it's dead and no, it isn't, it's very much alive and stuff. And there's things like web rings. They were there in the early days of the web, before we had Google, and we would find those connections. I think some of the bigger corporations run some of these web rings, but that's something we can do. And blogging communities, they still exist out there, and I kind of started to find a few of those. But to be honest, I was so used to just going to search to find all my information from the web that unless I knew about this, it's unlikely I'd find it. And I think it has been, and something I'm quite keen, I think, to do myself a little bit more with this is to make sure you create genuine links with people. So you can use things like web mentions and stuff by just naturally mentioning, why you're writing about something comes from somebody else's work. So you mention them, they become aware of it, you promote them, and, somebody takes from yours. And it's this nice circle of self-promotion, if you like, that doesn't rely on gaming,
it's like robbing one another's backs in a way, isn't it?
Yes.
It feels a little bit more like that. Yeah. And you're not doing it because you'll get a search result boost out of it. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Yes, exactly. And it also helps, you don't have to explain from the start again. If you're working on somebody else's work, you want to lead them to that so they can see where you started from.
Right.
And I think it just seems a much more sensible way to communicate with each other. So anyway, we'd be going on for some time, so I'm going to put speed up, hadn't I?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, probably we should wrap it up fairly soon. But just one quick thing, apropos of nothing, and that is to say that you were talking about search engines just now. I've kind of ditched Google as my search engine of choice, and I've gone over to using. Oh, you've got it there, Kagi. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. I believe that this was started by somebody who used to create a WordPress plugin, and I've forgotten which one it was, but it's probably one that you and I have both heard of. And they moved out of the WordPress space, and so the trade-off here is that I have to pay for it. But the good thing about it is that I'm not hoping to keep my search engine results for any length of time, so I don't feel like I want to own any of the data that I put into this. But the benefit is that you get an unsponsored set of search results, and they don't keep track on what you do, and you can prioritize certain domains. So say, for example, I was searching for, I don't know, like socks or something, I might be able to put in a bunch of local websites to me and say, actually, when you give me the search results, only select those websites to search through. So you can kind of curate the search, and in that way it kind of inoculates Kagi from that bias, which we have no doubt is in the Google search results. You can definitely get a sense that promoted content, sponsored content comes out at the top, which it always does. You can see that right at the beginning. And so I'm going to try this out for a little bit and we'll see how we go. I can't endorse it because I've not used it for long enough. I've only been using it for 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm going to give it a go. And I think it's $120 a year. I think they've got a 30-day trial or something if you want to give it a go. But I think it's a good thing for me to be doing.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I think with Google, as we realized, I mean, obviously they did it with things like encouraging us to use schema and rich snippets, which they don't need so much now with AI. But in some ways, we realize now it's to keep them, to keep us all on their domain rather than the original deal, which is we'll do what you want, Google, to make our sites, search friendly, and you send us the traffic.
Yeah,
let's go in.
Yeah. Give it a go, kagi.com, see what you think.
Yeah, well, I'll mention another one, which I put down here, because in fact, I put it down as a note there. As web users, we can try different search engines. You were already ahead of me, but I saw somebody else mention, talking about the indie web. Marginalia. Now, it's probably not that useful, but you kind of can search, and I can't, because honestly, I don't know it very well to be able to demonstrate it, and plus we're on audio, so I won't. But it basically will give you you can search by the sort of topic that you want. And I think, I'm not quite sure how it works, but it's kind of, the person who was recommending this as an approach said, and they really summed up for me what I feel about Google these days, is often the sort of stuff I'm interested in, I have to work through loads and loads of stuff. So I was trying to find that site I was promoting earlier, which is the HTML is for people. Couldn't remember what it was exactly called, the domain. Tried Google search, knew it was a fairly recent thing, couldn't find it. And everything I was listed really was a good SEO article by a big corporation. So it would be GoDaddy's article on HTML, or something like that. And pretty much everything was a corporate thing. So I think marginality, what was it called?
Marginalia or marginalia.
Marginal. Yeah. I've got it. I had it up here, didn't I? A moment ago. There we are. Yeah, it doesn't look particularly friendly, but I think it just allows you to search for sites. It's built really for the indie web type thing. It's where, in the same way. So, yeah, I didn't know it existed, but I just think that's quite fascinating.
That is. Yeah. Gosh.
The other thing is something I'm going to ask a client, actually. I'm going to speak to a client the day after tomorrow about their new site, and I'm going to ask them if they want me to block AI.
Oh, interesting. I mean, whether or not you'll be successful in that endeavor is up for question, because I don't know how honorable the robots.txt is, but certainly it's worth a shot. What's your intuition there? Do you get the feeling that most people don't want to contribute their own content into an AI LLM?
Yeah, I don't know. It's the first time I'm going to ask. It's just crossed my mind. I realize there's a beautiful list that I found of various ways of blocking it, somebody from the WordPress community.
I haven't done anything about that. My content is just out there, and presumably it gets scraped. I mean, it's not going to be scraped or have a great authority, but I haven't really drawn a conclusion about that. But it feels to me that certainly if you're a content creator, the voices are getting louder about that not being scraped, especially if you're a creative. You're a musician or something. It does seem like a bit of a shame that as a species, we've decided that, something that you can get for $1, a song created by a website that sucked up all the songs that are out there in existence, that doesn't seem particularly well aligned with humanity.
No.
I would be very surprised if the indie web movement is particularly well aligned with the AI movement, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah. Oh, I think, most will not. Yes, they will not want. A lot of people, I think, the people I follow now are not keen. They're very keen to to say that we haven't used AI with this one, or they're
Right.
very keen as well to point out that the cost of an AI search is so much greater than a normal search, which led me to the other point that I thought about what we could do. And I think, when it comes to our site, content site, we hadn't even talked about it before. And I was reminded by Bob Monsor from the Eleventy community that you can, on static sites, have a fairly good search these days. So I think this is a topic for us later to see how we could maybe implement some of these kind of indie web techniques, things like
Oh,
web
yeah, I'd
mentions
love
maybe.
that.
And
I would love
yeah,
to know how to implement those. So if we can do that, that would be wonderful.
yeah,
And you never know, the indie web community might be able to get something out of that as well. Great.
I think we've come to the end.
I think so. Let me find my mouse and put us back on the screen like that. So that's it. This one's going out as an audio as well as we'll
Yes.
stick it on the. Is it going on the YouTube as well?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
everything will there.
Isn't that ironic?
I know.
The irony. We're gonna use YouTube, but we're gonna
Like rain on a wedding day.
slag them off at the same time. So there we go. That's it. We'll see you next time. Thanks, David. That was really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, enjoy that. Bye.
Bye bye.